do is just very quickly, we're going to pick up again from where we started off last week. There's going to be a lot of thinking about COVID-19 because this is a long-term thing. It's probably, we may well be in a kind of semi-lockdown situation, potentially till the end of the year, potentially longer. We're really in a situation where we don't know how long this is going to take. So we're going to be thinking about this, I think, for an awfully long time to come and also a long time afterwards. But what I would very much like to do just to start here is to remind us roughly what we thought the seminar would try to do, and that's to answer Gary's question about what can philosophers do. And the three kind of legs of that question was roughly to do with, if I remember, to foster critical thinking, to kind of address the misinformation, disinformation, viral spread. That would be one of the things we could think about. The other leg of it would be to listen to all perspectives. That's part of the avoiding disinformation, misinformation. And the imaginative dimension. This is a massive life change that's happening to us. How are we going to imagine bringing about a different kind of future? I don't know if any of you saw the post that I put on our associated Facebook page. It's a little video of the flight activity, the air flight activity over Europe. It looks like an absolute universe of stars before COVID, and then the activity afterwards. I mean, the ecological impact of this, the social impact, all sorts of incredibly necessary and important things to think about. So, and also maybe this is the chance to imagine a different way of being, a different economic way of being, potentially. One of the things that Christy's been chatting to me about, and I think this is really important, is we're going to employ or deploy a massive amount of troops to sort us out, supposedly. What the hell? Given the fact that we already have some kind of, I think it's 28 or so cases against troops for brutality. Is this something we ought to be really thinking about quite seriously? So those kinds of things, what are we imagining for our kind of life in and around and sort of beyond COVID? So one of the things I'm going to I very much would like to just hear from each person. So I'm going to keep quiet now, but what I would love you to do is just introduce yourself, mention what the word lockdown kind of triggers in you, and what are you thinking about now? What would you like us to be thinking about? Because we would very much like to have this as a forum where you decide, this is what we want to think about, and then you take it over. I don't want to be speaking too much in these forums. I want it to be a kind of educating Andrea forum too. So I very much want to keep it as an open forum where people take it and do some thinking with it. And we can think about our kind of connection through thinking together as well as, so that would be part of our social cohesion kind of mandate. Okay, so I think I've talked enough already, and I would just very much like to listen to each person. I'm going to give it over to Hoshila to decide who, unless, you know.
Yeah, look, so I'm just, thanks, Andrea. I'm just going to go through the order as I'm seeing them on my screen. So next in line is actually Janet. So Janet, would you like to unmute and start us off today, please?
Hi, everybody. Can you see me? Or
yes,
you don't need to see me?
I can see you.
Okay, so I found this week extremely stressful, and I think it's mainly the uncertainty. But what lockdown means for me, it's not my environment, which is fine. It's the sense that it takes me back to the state of emergency and indefinite detention without trial, where you just don't know how long it's going to last. and you don't know when you're going to get out, so you can't plan anything. Anyway, that's my response to it. Otherwise, I'm really worried about the levels of social frustration that are going on out there, and I mean, we're a bit insulated from it, but the reports of police brutality and looting and so on, it takes me back 35 years to other very disturbing situations. So yeah, I'm finding it hard to cope with normal university administrative demands, you know, in this kind of context. Yeah, so that's all I want to say at this stage.
Thank you, Janet. Okay, can I get the Rudmans on, please? Sharon, Luke?
Hi. Okay.
Hi there.
Sure. For me, obviously, I've been on social media quite a lot recently, and what I've been seeing, especially from the environmentalist pages, is them saying how there's such potential for lockdown, for people to kind of analyze how we were functioning and treating the environment, and maybe a disruption. Not that this disruption is like a good thing, but maybe a disruption will give people a chance to really analyze the way we have been engaging with the environment. And so at least for that, there seems to be some interesting things coming out of that way of thinking. I think it's also, for me, been very highlighting of the socioeconomic gaps in South Africa, things that I thought I was aware of, but I wasn't aware of to the extent that they exist in reality. I think for me, it's been very eye-opening in that sense. So it's been a very educational time for me. Also a very slow time where I'm able to analyze things in a way that I wasn't able to beforehand. So yeah.
For me, lockdown, for me personally, it's been fine. I've got into a schedule, and so my life is working, and I have time to be creative and read. And so for me personally, I'm actually got to a point where I'm sort of enjoying it. But I'm very disturbed by the fact that I'm in this little bubble. I'm isolated from what's happening out there, and you hear about it, but you're not exposed to it. And it's, I mean, other than giving money, there's nothing that you can really do because you're stuck at home. So I have this feeling of impotence that, you know, one can't really, it's difficult to understand. Or you're just kind of stuck in terms of getting involved in I don't know, being useful. So yeah, so but perhaps I think very much what Janet was saying, that a sense of frustration and concern about what's happening out there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. If you guys would just like to mute yourselves again, that would help. And Gary, can we hear from you, please?
Hi, everyone. Can you, Sheila, you can hear me?
I can hear you. I can see you.
Okay, fantastic.
Thank you.
So for me, I have to say I'm not as productive as I would like to be during this period. And I think that that's a reflection of the, I wouldn't want to call it trauma. I have the same feeling as others, that you're a bit stuck in this no man's land kind of thing. So that's kind of where I am personally. But in terms of things that I've been paying attention to, the key one is information. And in this period, what is useful information and what's not useful information, and how critical, for instance, data has been in terms of guiding responses. But the data itself is a moving target and isn't perfect, you know. So at what point do you decide the data is good enough to make a decision on from the basis of it? I'm not as concerned about the military deployment and that kind of stuff. I've had the benefit of being inside that machine for 2 years, and understand what it is and what it isn't. I mean, I think it is absolutely terrible that the army has been doing what it's been doing, but that's not unexpected. It is how we've structured the army for the last for the last 200 years, ever since we've had an army. You know, so you're putting people in highly tense conflict situations and you're arming them, both with militaristic strategies, and that is what's going to happen. So I mean, that's not surprising. The question is, how do we manage that? And I imagine the president has a dilemma in that he needs people on the ground to help control things, and control is a word. But yeah, I'm not so concerned about it. So I mean, I think this is a very interesting time. You know, and as Luke is saying, there's a large call for rethinking how things work. The Herald's given a bit of attention to that, and I think, yeah, I mean, that's some of the other stuff I'm working on. So that's me.
Thanks, Gary, for that. David, can we hear from you, please?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I think this is a very interesting wake-up call period for all of us for different reasons that will relate to your own context, right? And I think our contexts are brought more and more into our immediate areas of focus the less we follow the news so much. So my question isn't so much about disinformation or fake news, but rather news in general. So a lot of people have been using numbers in the first 3 weeks of this thing that were just wrong. In fact, the WHO declared a pandemic based on the death rate of 3.4 or 5%. I think that came from Wuhan numbers that were also highly questionable. So right from then, it's been a very interesting exercise in believing what you read through mainstream media news sites like The Guardian. I'm interested in a governmentality that seems to pervade. So for the initial 3 weeks when one asked questions about numbers, that was not necessarily appreciated on all platforms. I know that from WhatsApp groups. There's a crisis, hospitals are being overwhelmed and so on. That's one aspect of this. I think the more authoritarian aspect that other members of the group have alluded to, Gary's not concerned with the military. Janet mentioned she's aware of it and it reminds her of some previous encounters in those contexts. Heightened authoritarianism, for sure, but what about the 500 billion that was just promised into an economy that was already battling? So a simple summary would be, is the solution of lockdown and authoritarian governmental control that much better than dealing with the pandemic, if it is indeed a pandemic, as it would spread through the population and taking control in your immediate context? So the more you watch the news, I don't think you're seeing those immediate contexts. And the question would be, can you see your immediate opportunities? So I'll end with a point on that. It's kind of a pragmatic point. What can you do in your own life? What can you do in your own life, in your own environment, the people around you, your neighbors, your community? I don't think we are capable of getting into areas now that need more help because there's military intervention. You get stopped on the road. I've been stopped twice traveling during the lockdown. So that's tying our hands big time. And I think a pragmatic approach, asking what can we actually directly deal with in our own lives, stay off the media a little bit more and figure it out in your home base. That's it.
Thanks, David. Thank you very much. Ethan, can we hear from you, please?
Hi, Sheila, can you hear me?
Hi, Ethan. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So what does lockdown mean for me? Basically also like a sort of limbo, like, you know, it doesn't feel like it's made up of many days. There's no yesterday, there's no tomorrow. It's just one long continuous thing, and that's what it feels like. But I do agree, it's, you know, it's interesting times, things are gonna have to change, but I don't really know how to think about it. I have no idea period. And yeah, and I've been seeing interesting stuff online. There's this YouTube channel that I like where there's a lot of podcasts, like a lot of different ones. Like there's one that's a philosopher, there's one that's an economist. Some of them are just writers, and all the conversations now are just about COVID-19. So I've seen a lot of people talk about it. There's a lot of interesting stuff. So yeah, at least people are trying to wrap their heads around it, and, whether it's the disease or what the economic situation will be like in the future. Yeah, okay, that's all I have to say. Bye-bye.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. Thank you very much. Bernie, can we hear from you, please?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I didn't join the last week's one, but I have to admit COVID has meant overwhelming. Everything is online, overwhelmed at the moment for myself. I have found that work has increased fourfold, if not more, because everyone thinks of themselves in their isolation, in their little world, and that their work that needs to be done. So I'm finding there's a disconnect between us, even though we are meeting, but there is still a disconnect in understanding expectations, that we have a lot of components on a plate, and not each component takes up the whole plate. And we have to try and divide our time and our energies within that plate, including dealing with our own, say, personal concerns, including with social concerns we may be involved in, with including our own family's needs and what they have to deal with and cope with it. So I'm finding that everyone is expecting you to be sitting around waiting, doing nothing, and able to just, do. And every solution is another webinar, another online meeting, another this, another that. Basically I sit online all day, and I'm finding it overwhelming doing that, to be quite honest. And then also I think I have quite a few concerns because some of the research projects I'm involved in, we are working very closely with local community, like small-scale fishers and subsistence fishers, and actually knowing what they are going through is really disempowering, because there's not much you can do other than like buy data for their phones, or help them find legal counsel because they've been arrested because the police who arrested them did not know that the law had been relaxed. For example, they are allowed to go and catch fish for their plate to put in a home, and but the military had not been informed that these had been relaxed, and so they arrested, and they're still sitting in jail. And you're trying to find mechanisms and work with people that they are released. So I think it has that. And then on a personal, I think it's also feeling trapped. I think, just being able to go out and work within, and just walk in nature. So my garden has a track around it, because we walk 2 kilometers just in the back garden every day, following a little orange coned route. So just to try and feel like you're getting fresh air in and escape from the online. To me, that's the biggest. I'm finding ways to escape online. I'm over it. Working at home, I love working at home, and I'm usually very techno happy. As you can see, we put up pretty pictures, and I get bored, and I'm sharing pictures. But I am finding online now to become overwhelming, because the expectation is that you're available 24/7. So if they don't get you on Zoom, they will get you on WhatsApp, they will get you on email, or they'll get you through Teams, or they'll get you in some way or other. Even to the point I'm seeing people I have only saw maybe once a year. I've seen them now nearly every week online, which is getting a bit much personally. Anyway, that's from me.
Thanks, Bernie. Thank you for that very insightful and I think, personal sharing that you've done there. And I think you've touched on a lot of points that a lot of us are feeling. So hopefully we can either, chat about that on a different day, make that the focus of the seminar, but let's see how it goes. Before I get the next person on, I just want to say welcome to Glenn and Polindlela and Ayanda, and I'm just admitting Luan Sapost also now onto the group, so I don't know where he's gone. I have said he could come through, but in the meantime, can we hear from Denai, please?
Hi everyone. I'm gonna keep my video off because my network connection isn't so great. So yeah. So I wasn't in last week's meeting as well. But for me, lockdown has, I think the biggest thing that I associate with it is uncertainty. Yeah, there's just a lot of uncertainty in so many aspects, and so that's one of the biggest associations I've been making where lockdown is concerned, and then just some things that I have been thinking about or experienced. Even though we are in a forced isolation, I found myself choosing to isolate from all the news. We're just bombarded with news. This is what's happening, statistics, everything from all over and I've found it quite overwhelming, and I've found myself choosing to be isolated from that. Of course, I am making sure that I know what's going on in terms of, following updates and stuff. I get notifications on my phone from the different news apps that I have. But beyond that, I have been trying to avoid like sitting in front of the TV or watching stuff, just because it becomes so overwhelming, and because for me there's a lot of uncertainty, and I'm just trying to process and deal with everything that's happening as best I can from everything else, just so that I can get my head around it. So yeah, that's all from me.
Thanks, Denai, for that. And I think it sort of is following through from what Bernie was saying. But yeah, thank you so much. And Glenn, welcome.
Hi, colleagues. Nice to be with you again after such a long time. For me personally, the lockdown has been lovely because I've been able to spend some quality time with my instrument again and practice and get to play some lovely music. I've been able to spend lovely time with my dog. Also, like Bernie, going out into the garden a lot. But I've also realized that that's a very privileged position which I'm holding in this lockdown, especially also living on my own. I don't have to be worried about anybody else besides myself and my dog. So it's made me aware of the fact, of course, that coming back to sort of what Pedro was speaking about last week, that the way that you experience lockdown has got to do a lot with your lived experience and the perspective which you hold in life. So unless you have got family who's been fired or are now finding themselves unemployed or waiting also in line for the SASSA grants or food parcels like I have got in my own family, I'm more concerned about now not my own well-being any longer, but my immediate loved ones. And I think that's the reality for a lot of people across South Africa is, gosh, I don't only have to worry about my own future, but the people around me also. And life is never going to be the same for anyone moving forward. And I hear this a lot with my students, that the last thing on their minds right now is actually what's got to do with the curriculum content or assessment, and that they actually feel quite betrayed and neglected by the university in this moment, because they are the clients, yet they've had such minimal consultation in what they think is the best way forward. So for me, that's been eating at me, because I feel as though I'm part of the system telling them, well, we're just moving full steam ahead with the online learning. And there's so much uncertainty again, coming back to what some of the earlier speakers said. So for me, it's a time of uncertainty, and also having to make critical decisions about how do I navigate the future going forward. And I think that's a pressing concern for people right now, more so than following instructions from the government, or they are wanting to know where's my meal, my sustenance going to be coming from. So that's it from my side, but nice to join you guys all again.
Thank you, Glenn. I actually want to respond to something you said, but before I do that, Tanai, have you connected again, because you are showing up twice on the screen? Today? Okay, let's just see what happens there. Glenn, I just want to, something that you've said, you used a word which I think in the last 4 weeks haven't heard much, and that is the word future. I think we've all been so caught up in what's happening right now that to actually use that word future, we've forgotten about it, but at the same time, we are actually thinking about it, because I think it's that question of, where is this all going to take us? But yeah, thank you for your contribution. And then Lela, if you'd like to join us, please.
Hi, sorry, hello. Hi everyone, thank you again for this time, and it's good to meet with you all again. I stepped in late, so I just gathered that the question is what has lockdown sort of done, and what is it meaning to me at this point in time?
Yes, yeah. What does the question was? What does the word lockdown mean to you?
I haven't had a haircut for ages, and it's starting to feel really terrible. I think in terms of what my thoughts have been, really, I mean, I moved from being on sabbatical to lockdown. So in some sense of the word, I've already been at home for quite a while, but I think that the added restrictions, not being able to move about, or not being able to go to my place of work, even if I was on sabbatical, that sort of restriction, that sense of, stay at home, that added a new dimension to the sense of distancing. So it's strangely enough, my productivity levels dropped immediately as soon as, in the space of lockdown being announced. And it took about a week to sort of like reconfigure myself around, it's okay not being at work, but now I have to be at home and not go anywhere. And that was a complete shift in mentality. But I suppose some of the things that I've been thinking about were resources aligned with some of the thoughts that Glenn had around students' resources, my own personal resources about, things that one might need, I might need, or the household and things like that. And in some respects, I also echoed Anai's concerns about the uncertainty and the idea of turning down the noise in as much as we are in lockdown. Social media and everything else, it really was blowing up with all sorts of different news, and one has to find some sort of routine to sort of make sure that you're filtering out the information that is not necessarily conducive to us thinking about going forward, but rather than creating hype and sort of a sense of desperation around when is this all going to end. Another aspect I've been thinking about is the question of energies, time, and productivity, and our sort of associations with that. It's like how much we constantly say that we always need time to do something, and at this point in reflection on productivity, people using this time to say, well, if you're not productive in this time, something must be wrong, you need to learn a new language. All of that has a strange psychological pressure on the use of time, and our sense of where we all are is, we're all in this together, but must we all come out now speaking Mandarin and so forth. And one has to sort of get a sense that, this productivity contest comes from a different way of thinking around how we do our work, what it means to have rewards, and how we have to end each day having fulfilled ourselves in some respect or something. And perhaps the last thing to think about that has been on my mind is in terms of where we're going forward, is there some sort of new world order that's going to be in place in terms of not just in our person-to-person contact, in terms of physicalities, shaking hands, hugging, and all the rest of it, human contact, but in terms of what it means to to function socially as people. How do we go about the future of being ourselves with others? And I think those are some of the thoughts that I've really been having during this time. Thanks.
Thanks, Valindela. Also, yeah, whole lot of insightful stuff that we could go on talking about and reflecting on for a long time. The next person I want to introduce is a young lady. Her name is Ayanda Kubai. She is one of the students that we as the Iscia chair are funding this year. So Ayanda, if you'd like to come on, and I know you came on late, and the question basically was, what does lockdown mean to you? So it'll be interesting to hear from you. Ayanda, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Hey guys, thank you for the opportunity. I'm sorry for not joining last week. There was a lot happening. For me, well, yeah, I've been overwhelmed. I've been dealing with a lot of emotions, especially living with an essential worker who just had a mental breakdown just like yesterday. So the anxiety and the anger and the uncertainty that has actually overwhelmed me and everyone around me. But the silence of the university have always also been like overwhelming. We don't know what's the way forward, and I'm quite worried about students who do not have access to the internet. I'm quite worried about what's going to happen to them because a lot of students have been complaining. So the silence of the universities have been weighing heavy on everyone. But so far, we've been trying to exercise, we've been trying to move forward and be positive and trying to filter all the news, we've been trying to entertain ourselves and that's as far as I can go for now. Like, I'm just not fine. There's a lot of stress around me and everything, but thank you. Sorry.
All right. Yeah, thanks, Ayanda. Thank you. Andrea, do you want to come back on at this point, please?
Hi. Yes. Okay. There's been so many there's so much anxiety underneath all of our responses, isn't there? And I suppose, I think this is what Ayanda was talking about, in a sense, the silence of the university. I think one of the things is that the university is made up of a whole community of people who are also really struggling to figure out what to do. Nobody knows what to do. So I think the university is kind of, I'm not sure of this, but I certainly feel disconnected and unable to kind of act except in a personal capacity, in a way, rather than in a kind of a university capacity. So I think the university is also struggling, just like students and essential workers, to figure out how to act, how to be. All of us are wondering about that. Maybe that's part of what we can do here, is just at least have a voice in some sense, connect with one another a bit, and possibly start helping each other figure out where it is that we're trying to go. But we're all stumbling around in the dark. That's why we've all got these fancy, beautiful pictures behind us. It's like a kind of fantasy, like, oh my gosh, I don't want a terrifying, scary darkness. I don't want even my home up at the back there. I just want something that kind of, it's almost like a fantasy kind of, I won't say denial or not, but yes. So I think that's pretty much how I would respond, is that there's struggling to figure this out. There's lots of massive issues. I mean, oil, for instance, is at minus whatever is minus money a barrel. That's crazy. It means a whole different world potentially. So there's also, although we're all struggling, there's also a lot of opportunity to think about a different world, which is pretty exciting. Lots of fear, lots of uncertainty, lots of potential. Could go horribly wrong, could go fabulously right, but we don't know. So I mean, that's a non-response in a way. I'd like to hear from people who would also like to respond to different aspects. So I'm going to turn myself off again. And then if you'd like to talk, maybe just turn your video on, or signal to Harshila, and she'll let you go through. Okay, all right. I'm going to turn off now.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. David, do you want to respond to that,
Very
please?
quickly, yes. On the anxiety points, I feel like that is something that we can work on. So we can't really deal with what's happening with the oil price. And as Andrea's saying, that might be good, might be bad in the long run. Maybe there's a reorganization of economic factors in the near future. There's going to be. But if we're anxious about it, I don't know how we can respond from our, call it authentic or safe spaces. So Ayanda, strength to you, as Gary pointed out there, I would really just encourage some kind of mindful practice for all of us as individuals, and operate from a space where we feel like we aren't panicking necessarily. So it's so cheesy, but 10 deep breaths, trying to move away from the attention on family members who are freaking out. That's beyond your control. But you can, to a certain extent, try and deal with your emotional space. So that's just the pragmatism that I called for earlier, and I would just differentiate between that kind of basic pragmatism and productivity. No one's calling for productivity right now. It's a lockdown, and part of lockdown means that life as we know it stops for a while. So what do we do in that time when life is stopped for that period of time? I think we can work on finding our safe spaces, whatever we have to do to find those spaces, and then operate from that space as much as possible. Easy for me to say, I'm not on the streets, and that is a big deal, but we can't deal with what's on the streets until we've dealt with ourselves. I'll stop.
Thanks. Thank you, David. Does anybody else want to share something at this point? Nobody? Who's coming on? Glenn. Thanks, Glenn. You can unmute there.
I think it's got a lot to do with grief as well. You know, people are very sad that we have lost something. We've lost this old way that we've become used to. I think it comes back also to what Vulindlela was mentioning earlier, which is, you know, you also feel as though you're not able to express that you do have fear. So as much as I agree with David that we are practicing mindfulness, I certainly am, and I think that's one of the reasons I've been able to remain sane. But we have to acknowledge that we are going through various emotions, each one of us, and we are grieving something. Some people are grieving the loss of a job. Some people are grieving the loss of a future that they held in their mind's eye. You know, whatever it is, we have to acknowledge that we are going through something, and we have to release it and be gentle with ourselves. And we should be all right to also say to other people, I'm not available for that right now. Gary, I think you were next.
Okay, Gary. Thanks, Glenn. Thank you for that.
I just wanted to share a very quick anecdote. I lived in Iran for a year and experienced an earthquake whilst I was making pancakes. And it was the most unsettling thing to try and not burn my pancakes whilst standing in the doorway, whilst the entire world, I didn't have a framework for understanding how that took place. And and just to follow on to what David's saying, I think that that's what we're experiencing, is that our entire normal framework has shifted to areas that we've not experienced before. And so for us, we're trying to not burn the pancakes at the same time. So there's going to be a whole bunch of stuff that's going to take place that isn't what we consider normal. There will be some kind of new normal that emerges, but there'll be a whole lot of old stuff that's still going to be there. We'll still be dependent on fossil fuels, etc., etc. But I think David's comment is that we need to be gentle with ourselves during this period. Is, I think, a very important rider to anything that takes place. And that was just from me.
Thanks, Gary. Thank you for that. Yeah, does anybody else want to say something at this stage? Andrea.
Am I unmuted? Okay, thanks, man. I mean, I agree with that completely about the creating a safe space for yourself. That's not easy to do. And also that we need to be preparing for grief. I think I'm with Glenn very much there. As far as I understand our statistics and projections and all of that, we are nowhere near the peak of this thing. We're only just getting started on it. And if we are going to follow the trajectory of other countries, I know we're not supposed to compare countries, but it seems almost inevitable that we cannot avoid a peak in this. We already know people in Port Elizabeth who are on ventilators who have died from this disease, and we're going to hear of a lot more people. I think that's something that Ayanda is making me feel anxious about, not on purpose, but I wonder if there is the potential for the university to provide a kind of discussion forum, something like this, but obviously we're not qualified to discuss, but maybe the psychology department. Could we not ask the psychology department to provide at least some kind of discussion forum for this kind of anxieties with the psychology personnel? Would there be, do you think that we would have the right to maybe ask that? Would that be a good idea? That would be a question. I mean, we could certainly try that. Okay, I'm going to mute.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. Ayanda, are you okay?
Yes, I am. I'm okay. I'm going. I'm fine. I'm better.
Okay, good. Glad to hear that. Yeah. So I just want to share something at this stage. The reflection that I woke up with this morning, particularly after last night's announcement or speech. I think there was a lot of expectation in terms of, what he was going to say, because the big question was, would the lockdown go on, or would he lift the lockdown? And I think if you understand the document and that whole, the risk document, the risk adjusted strategy that they're using, the reflection that I woke up with this morning is, number one, I understood that obviously he's not the one that will provide the detail to us, and it's the different ministers through their portfolios that will provide us with that detail that I think so many of us are looking for at this point. But for me, the actual reflection is, at the end of the day, this is all up to us, each of us individually, because if you look at the situation that we've been placed now with this risk-adjusted model, and the fact that we could be moved up a level and go back to level 5 lockdown, or come down to 3 or 2, where we sort of things will ease up quite a bit. I realize that it's all dependent on how we're going to do things, you know. So do we flock to the marketplace, if I can call it that? Not that there's much that one can be purchasing, or do we continue in this way that we have, where we've remained isolated within our homes and things? And it then takes you back to how we started the seminar, is what does lockdown mean to you? And what Pedro said, that lockdown, it's what your lived experience is. So there's a lot of thoughts, there's a lot of emotions, which I think we all are going through. And I'm not sure, you know, what the next steps are for us as the seminar. You know, do we, in terms of what do we want to talk about next week? So we will gladly take some suggestions from you at this stage, to you know, in terms of what do we speak about next week? Is there a focus point, or do you want to keep it general? So I'd like to hear from all of you that are on at the moment, please.
Sheila, I think Ethan wants to talk.
Okay, Ethan, please go ahead.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say, a friend sent a message in one of my WhatsApp groups the other day. I'm not sure what her father does, but it's something to do with hospitals. Which the message was, they've had a call from one of the Livingston doctors. He says things in PE aren't good. They have a lot of cases that haven't been reported. I think he's like high up in this or whatever. The stadium is being converted into a COVID testing and treatment center. Yeah, and then that's like the end of it, basically. So yeah, I just wanted to let you all know that even when things seem like, oh, the numbers aren't high, you know, admin in the Eastern Cape and whatever, it's not great. So you don't know.
Yeah. Thanks for that. That was actually something I shared with Andrea yesterday as well, because the minister was here a couple of days ago, and he's actually now moved the running of our health department. He's got government people, he's seconded government people to come into the Eastern Cape now to do what needs to be done. And there was the article in the Herald yesterday was quite a scathing one on our health system, and the fact that there have been huge numbers, the underreporting on positive cases, on people that have died, etc., etc. David, you want to say something? Could you unmute, please?
Thanks. The question about what to do for next week, I thought maybe I'd throw out a suggestion of framing exercises. So I come from that background recently of philosophical consulting, and we often look at ways to reframe a situation. And what I found pretty useful is to look at the pandemic as being constituted by the virus and what's happening biologically with people and illness and the spread of the virus, and then the human response to the pandemic. And you can see there's quite a big impact from both sides, but the human response might, from how I frame it at least, isn't necessarily based on the biological facts of the matter, so to speak. So I would be interested to see how people frame what they see as the facts of the virus and the human response to it.
Okay, Andrea, do you want to come in here, please?
Here I am. Okay, am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Yes, I think that that sounds like certainly an interesting possibility. I think we must certainly think about how we frame, as if I'm getting you right, it would be that it's a bit like the perspectives thing, a bit like what Pedro was talking about last week, that the way that you frame this will be very different depending on your circumstances. And there's another very interesting aspect, and that is motivated reasoning. And that means that you frame something according to a particular ideology that you've chosen emotionally, and then you use your intellect to kind of justify whatever your kind of emotionally chosen position is. So framing would be a very interesting exercise. I mean, I agree with that. So what I would very much like us to do, it doesn't necessarily have to be now in this forum. We've only got about 8 minutes or so left. But what I would like you to do is contact me. I've made notes from this forum about some of the interesting topics. And I think it would be very interesting to see if we could bring at least an expert or a host or somebody with kind of a sort of background knowledge on a particular subject to talk to us. We'll see if we can do that and then have a kind of a response to those kinds of interventions, perhaps like a 20 or 30-minute talk sometimes. So it doesn't always have to be I mean, I like the interconnectivity I've very much appreciated this session of hearing everybody's voices. So yeah, I think it would be, the process to go through now would be to just take up suggestions, and then we'll find a way of integrating them all into a kind of a weekly session. If in the end we decide not to have say a themed session, then we can have a check-in session again. You know, how's everyone doing? What's happening? So that we kind of do the idea of connecting together through kind of thinking together, and some of it will be just a matter of checking in and how are things going. Yeah, so yes, the other suggestion that we have had at the moment is a input on the military. Christy van der Westhuizen is very keen on hosting a seminar on that topic. So it might, you know, I mean, obviously it's not necessarily going to be a worry for Gary, let's put it that way, but I think there might be a good reason then to come in and talk about why it isn't a worry, and have a conversation with an expert on that. So yes, yeah, bring them in. What I would very much like to do is have a person who's not me hosting a particular topic. So if there's something that's really kind of that you really want to expand on, then this is the time, or after this, email me and we can slot it into a program. A bit like our tributary seminar program that just kind of went from week to week and followed the topics as they came up. Okay.
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, next week, it's actually a very short working week if we were in normal times, because there's a public holiday on Monday, there's a public holiday next week, Friday. So we're actually going to be running our seminar next week, Thursday. That's the 30th of April. You will all get the meeting notification again once I've set up that meeting. But maybe we should just leave that as a check-in one for next week, Andrea. And there's something, you know, as I'm saying, because it's the short week, I think the one on the securitization, which Christy wants to sort of co-host with us, I think we must just wait a week or two and let those military forces actually get their feet on the ground and see how it's all sort of unfolding before we delve into a discussion around that. You know, let's give it some time to play out. I think it only comes into effect on the 1st of May, which is next week Friday. So maybe 2 weeks from then we could set up that one, I think. Okay.
Yes. Okay, right. Sorry. So then I'm going to potentially, maybe this is a cheat, but oh no, wait, I was going to say just like call on somebody to lead next week's session. What would, okay, wait.
Gary or,
yeah. Or
David?
Dave, or the two of you together, yeah. Would that be, maybe we should just have a kind of, I mean, you can use the chat function if you want to, just to say yes or no. That would be interesting, or no thanks, or
I speak too much. I speak too much. Can you hear that?
Yes, David, I can hear that. But I think at the same time, you have valuable contributions to make. So it would be nice to get you to facilitate our session next week.
Sounds like trying to get yourselves with a hook. Could we do the reframing thing for next week?
Andrea, you okay with that?
Everybody gets 5 minutes or a certain time to, what do you think's happening, and what do you think, so what's happening with the virus, and what's happening on the ground? Does what's happening on the ground, is it justified by what we know about the virus? Because just my final comment here, I'm not sure if that big a real threat. Yes, if you're in the vulnerable categories and elderly and immune system and that kind of thing, but is what's happening on the ground justified by that ever-present threat of illness and accidents and metaphysical stuff happening to you? If Gary wants to do that with me, I'd have to give it a try. Share that kind of thing.
Dave, your sound is breaking up a bit, but okay, let's do that. Let's, I think it sounds like an interesting exercise. Perhaps also we could, inform ourselves a bit about what we think is happening. We do have, remember, the two sort of online forums. We've made a Facebook page for the chair, and we've also made a Google Groups where we can actually share information if you like. I think it is an interesting question. I think the background to Dave's question, I might be wrong about this, but has to do with Trump and America and this resistance to lockdown. Is lockdown the solution to a threat that might not be a virus or a pandemic? Is this really a virus or a pandemic? That's a fairly controversial question, and maybe it is.
So can I step in again?
Yes, sorry,
I'm
might
not claiming
be
that
misreading you.
Yeah, definitely. I'm not
okay, sorry.
questioning that there's a virus out there that's very dangerous for lots of people. I'm just not sure if that danger justifies 500 billion rand being acquired in a concentrated political context. We actually don't know if lockdown and that kind of concentrated power response is the correct response, but we're watching that happen. We're watching our freedoms being heavily limited. We can't necessarily do anything about that big response from government, from the military. If hospitals get overrun, then we know that that is justified, but that actually hasn't really happened everywhere. In fact, it's the exception to the rule. I think that's what I'm asking. So if people could say, well, what do you think is happening? And so, 500 billion rand that will indebt this country to its beyond its eyeballs, perhaps drowning it. Is that the right response?
Okay, I think, Andrea, we'll settle on that for next week then.
All right, let's also, sorry to interrupt you, but let's settle on a much more focused question. I think there's a question coming out of this. What we'll do is think about it a little further and then focus it on an actual question. It seems to be a question about the authoritarianness of the response, the potential conflict between health and economy. So we'll formulate a much more focused question, and we'll put that out on the invitation and maybe start adding some posts to our Facebook page and to the Google groups, and then maybe let's try to answer a very much more focused question. Does that sound sensible?
Andrea, sorry, Gary has suggested, I think it's a topic on the chat, which he's saying the reality of COVID-19 versus the idea of COVID-19.
Perfect.
I'm not sure.
Yes.
Is that
yes.
Shall we go with
that's,
that?
That's exactly what framing is all about, and I think that's what David is getting at as well. So yes, let's that's a deeply philosophical question as well, sort of appearance and reality kind of question.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think we're going to rely on Gary to be our kind of question creator. Let's do that. Listen, we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah.
I think it's time now for us. At least I'm going to say.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Everybody happy? Does everybody want to just come onto their videos just to do a quick bye kind of thing? There we go.
Bye. Okay. Thank you. Thanks. See you next week.
Yes. See you next week. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we'll send out the next notification and things for you to get back on next week. All right. Thank you all for your valuable contributions. All right. Take care. Bye. Bye.